Well, hey, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the next section of ZEISS Conversations. We've taken a little bit of time off, but we're back because we have a very special guest for you today. His name is Arthur Rainville. He's a grandfather and a photographer, in that order, I'm told. But he's going to talk to us today about really how to find your soul and how to really kind of rev up your passions and bring them to art and to your into the frame. So without further ado, today's guest in the center square there is Mr. Arthur Rainville, Grandpa Arthur Rainville, as we were saying. On the left, you see Kenneth Hines, our ZEISS ambassador and frequent contributor here on ZEISS Conversations, as well as Tracy Page on the right side, also sitting in with us today, one of our other ZEISS ambassadors. And myself, I'm Tony from ZEISS, and welcome to the conversation. So, hey, Arthur, I'm glad to have you with us today. I know we've talked about this for a little while, but I'm excited about today's conversation.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here during happy hour. So that's
absolutely. And
I think the timing is everything.
There's many a bar off camera right now.
Yeah,
but
that's one of the great things about Zoom.
I know, absolutely. It's the ease of getting together when we're not really together. Yeah. So, but Arthur, why don't you perhaps you can give us a little bit of background on how you came to your specific style of putting the imagery together, and what you're up to these days.
Well, I'm up to grandpaing. That's finally that point now. That's the most important part of my life right now.
And congrats for that.
But I've been. Basically, this profession's been really good to me. I've been a professional photographer my whole life. That's it. I've made my entire living as a portrait photographer. I am second generation. My father was a small town portrait photographer, and I stepped into that and never looked back. Part way along the way, I decided to become an educator and learned that I loved that more than almost anything. So that's what I've done for 60-ish years. I've done portrait photography and some fine art stuff, and mostly teaching and lecturing, and that's, here I am. I'm all yours.
Awesome. Glad to hear it. Well, I have we've been looking over some of the imagery that you've sent us, and it's kind of exceptional, and it has a distinct look to it. And I know that one of the things that we were talking about is not only how you derive that technically, which is a conversation in itself, but also where do you find your muse? How do you bring yourself to the images that you want to portray to people?
Mine's been an interesting ride, but I'd rather talk about your ride. First of all, there are no revelations today. Only respectful reminders of what you guys each already know out there to be your truths. The question I get most of the time from photographers, from artists, is what do I need to do to make better work? How do I need to take it to the next level? So early on in my 60-ish years of doing this, I thought that if I had the great equipment, that I would start making great work. And then I figured out that if I learned how to really use that great equipment and really kick it up a notch, I would make great work. Next, I figured out, well, maybe if I studied the work of great artists and stuff, then I would finally get to the point where my work would sing. And I finally figured out that while all of that stuff is a piece of the puzzle, understanding my own true nature, my private sense of my rights and wrongs, and my way of seeing and thinking and feeling, that's what was going to bring my work to where it needed to be. Basically, this has to become your obsession. And I would suspect that most of you who are with us today are with us today because this is your obsession. Whether you do it for your livelihood or whether you do it just for joy, you were probably put on this planet to make the work that you're about to make the rest of your life. And you're just going to do it. And it's a never-ending process. The great impressionistic artist Renoir, on his deathbed, said, "Damn it, I was just beginning to get it. It's never going to end." And that's the way it's supposed to be. You're supposed to just keep on going.
Always improving. Yeah.
Yeah.
Or
Someone
finding
had
new ways to express yourself. Certainly.
I think you can see a little bit about where some of my attitude comes from. Arthur has been transfusing it into me for the last few years. Arthur, by the way, Gina is with us and she
Hello,
said hello.
Gina Sweetness.
So Arthur, if for those of you who don't know me that well, Arthur is my mentor. He has guided me for the last few years, and he has taught me how to get some of the emotion that I can bring through my work, how I can and get it out and into my pieces. And I am ever so appreciative. So we do want to talk about that. If you have ever seen, I know quite a few people out there have seen Arthur speak before, and you leave every presentation crying. And that's because Arthur is so good about tapping into the soul of who we all are as artists and as people. And Arthur, I don't even know how you do that. You're going to have to tell us what your magic is.
Well, I think part of the magic is you figuring you out. And in this day and age, I don't think people give themselves a chance to do that. We're so consumed when we get out of bed in the mornings of getting through the day and doing everything we're supposed to do that we don't give ourselves much time to do that. I think where it started is I had to have some basic understanding of some stuff that mattered to us. For instance, early on I asked that question, what is art, right? And I guess the answer to that is everything is art, right? Because everybody's an artist. And that's because everybody's creative. And I'm sure you're all saying, well, I know plenty of people who are not terribly creative. They may not be creative to you in your moment with them, but they're creative. We're all creative in every moment of our life, whether it's problem solving or whatever. That's part of your God-given guts, that you're creative when you need to be. The trick is to focus in on that and figure it out where you're best at it and stuff. So everybody's creative, everybody's making art in their own way. It doesn't mean that all of it's great, but is it great in your eyes? That may be enough. Does it need to hang on museums and be worth millions? I always tell a story about my father being a small town portrait photographer. And he wasn't into making great art. He was into making great pictures for people to remember with. And his pictures are never going to hang on museum walls and be worth millions, but they hang on heart walls all over the town and they're worth priceless to the people that have them. So it's a perception thing. It's always a perception thing.
One thing with the age of social media and what I'm enjoying about this conversation is your viewpoint to art as a whole. And something that I've done on social media is it stemmed from a lot of people looking to me for what I do online, the images and work that they see of me online. People generally want to message me constantly, send me numerous images, tell me if this is great or not, tell me what you think of this. And my response is always the same to everybody. I don't critique or review people's work because what my thoughts are, it's not the fundamental importance for you. It's, do you like what you're doing? Do you look at a photo and say, I really like that photo, or I hate the photo? And I think the age of social media now, it's people have these photographers or artists that they look up to, and it's kind of like they're looking for validation. And my response is, validation is just for parking. It's not for you to say, well, this is an amazing photo or not. It's about, do you feel, anything when you look at your own work? And someone left me a comment a couple of days ago that I really liked and said I would treasure it. And they said, I enjoy the fact that you take photos with your heart. And that's something that I feel a lot of people aren't doing. So for people who fall in that category that are looking for that validation, what would you say to them? What kind of ideas or tips, what would you share? What kind of message would you share for people like that?
The tricky part to that is, who are you making it for? you're either making work for someone else as a means to make your livelihood, or as a means to get on the walls of a museum or whatever, or you're making it for you. There have been artists down through the generations. Well, who's that? Somebody didn't turn their phone off. Telemarketers. All artists through the generations, and some have made it to the museum walls and some haven't. And I'm always fascinated by that, because there's work on museum walls that I guess is okay, but that's my perception. And obviously somebody's perception was that it was amazing. And the stuff that I run across every day that I think is amazing, that doesn't sometimes make it. Part of that is process. And step one of the process is for you to understand you. And you got to almost figure out what it is about you that you want to bring to your work, whether it's making a portrait that's really honest and meaningful to somebody. And that means that you need to find a way for you to connect with that person, not just to make a pretty map of their face, but to make a meaningful picture of it. If it means you're making your art for landscapes or whatever it is, it still has to come from the way that that landscape, when you're looking at it and about to make the picture, how you feel about that landscape in that moment. It all comes back to you. Then it comes down to the process of how you make pictures. And I'm betting an awful lot of you, unless you spend some time, and we've spent some time together, haven't had this exercise, but this is a good exercise for everybody to have. So you grab a magazine, Vogue or anything, and just rip pages out of the magazine. Don't go start analyzing them as you're looking at them. Just if you flip a page and it hits your interest, just rip it out. Rip, rip, rip. At the end of that exercise, you just take all those pictures and throw them down. This is a throw down exercise. Throw them on the floor and step back and look at them. And you start to look for similarities. So these are not your pictures. That takes you out of the moment. And you look for similarities. And amazingly enough, every time we've done this exercise in the class, there's folks that all of a sudden there's piles of black and white. And I say, do you do black and white? And they say, well, no. I said, well, why? Because you're drawn to it, obviously. Or people will have bold color palettes, or people will have lots of very tight close-ups on negative space and things. And I'll say, do you do that? And they say, well, not usually. I say, why? Because you are obviously drawn to it. So you need to figure you out visually, and then you can figure you out emotionally. What matters to you enough, and how do you bring that to your work? We keep using the word work, and that is the end product of what you're making. Doesn't mean it's what you're doing for a living or anything else. All of those things come into play. I don't know. It's very complicated, but it's very simple. And if you read the life of great artists, ever since I started on this, I've studied for 60 years every day. That's just part of the plan. Every single day. I've never missed a day in my life without reading about other artists. And of course, it's so easy nowadays. We used to always say you can only do it in a museum. And that's another whole level. But you need to, at least whether you Google it or whatever, every single day look at something different. What goes in eventually comes out if it's the right stuff to you at that moment. And you'll start to figure you out. That's what's going to make your stuff better. Not copying somebody else's, but understanding and discovering you in your work.
I think
And
that's
so for anybody out there who wants to do this exercise, what Arthur was saying about just ripping them out, you really want to do this arbitrarily, because you want to emotionally connect to what's drawing your eye. You don't want to spend too much time thinking about it. So do that exercise, spread them out on the floor. And then as I remember, Arthur, when we did that exercise, then you had us narrow it down quite a bit.
Yeah. And you can continue that exercise. You can do it with your own work. Throw down a bunch of work of yours and put a circle of people around you. can be family, friends, anybody, customers, I don't care who it is, other photographers, whatever, and let them see what they see in it. Sometimes we can't see our own forest through the trees sometimes.
So some of what I'm the reason that I asked Arthur to come on with us today is that I'm hoping that, I know there are a lot of us that just feel creatively uninspired. I hear that question or that comment a lot, and just don't know where to push themselves to go. And this is the guy who can inspire you and get you to get your wheels turning and think of different ideas. And some days my brain just doesn't stop, and I owe that to Arthur, because he pushes me, and he still pushes me. Sometimes I get messages from him that ask me what the heck I'm doing or why the heck I'm not doing something else. He can be relentless, but I love him. Arthur, one of the other things that you really pushed me to do was to look at the photographers and the artists that came before me. Let's start with talking about the painters and the artists, and if we're going to be looking at museums and books, where should we start there?
Well, like I said, I mean, obviously going physically to a museum or a gallery or somewhere is the best step. You get a different vibe. You receive the information differently standing physically in front of the art. But if you can't do that in this day and age, and it's so wonderful in this day and age that we can go on and Google, or we can go on and virtually every art museum in the world now has their entire collection online that you can just look at. The question is always, what's the takeaway? You know, you can look and look and look. How many times I've taken folks with me to museums and they look and look and look, and I'll say, what did you get from that experience? And they don't always necessarily know. One of the ways that we've managed to bring that to the surface is, I usually say, okay, if you could take any one painting home with you that you just looked at in this whole museum, you could just take it home, what would it be? And why? These are the questions you need to ask yourself. I mean, you need to be your own best friend on this one. And it's pretty easy in this day and age, you know. Part of it is also working your way through your process. Each of you out there has process. You already got it. You may not be terribly aware of it, but you have your process. Now, you can either live with it the way it is and embrace it and make your art with it, or you can consider what you need to change a little bit to kick it up the next notch. Process is the way you think and create, and what was your inspiration to start with and things. Process, for instance, Mozart used to sit down and write an entire symphony in one fell swoop, whatever a fell swoop is. He would just write the whole damn thing. Beethoven, on the opposite side, would write a little bit, and he'd have to get up and take a break. And he'd write a little bit, he'd have to get up and take a break, and he'd come back. I mean, each of you do this differently, right? Think about the times you have looked at your image up on the screen in Photoshop or Lightroom or whatever you use. Some of you just stick with it and get right through it all. You get through the technical side of making it brighter or more saturated, whatever it is. And yet some of you, I bet, and these are the ones I think that are taking it to the next level, take time to make it better. Time is the biggest friend. When I started, it was only Photoshop. There was no Lightroom. And Lightroom came along, and the point of Lightroom was to batch process and things like that. If you had a pile of images, to try to do it all and save time. Okay, fine, save time. But what do you do with the time? It's not time saved, it's time savored, right? So every single time, and you've had this experience. That's what I mean when I started saying, I'm not going to share anything that you don't already know today. Think of the times that you have made an image and you got it exactly the way you thought it was great, and you walk away from it, it's done. And you come back the next day and you get a moment, you bring it up and you say, oh, wait a minute, I could do this, I could change that. Giving it a chance, giving it life, giving it a chance at life, right? Think of it as a daylily. Daylily comes out, it doesn't matter what day it is. If it's pouring buckets, it's still coming out, but it's got one day to live. Give it a chance at life. And Spend time with it. See what you can do. For me, process breaks down into some categories. All right, there's hardware. That's your great ZEISS lenses and stuff. You have to start with a worthy image, right? It can't be a piece of crap to start with. You got to start with a worthy image. Software, and whether you embrace Photoshop, Lightroom, whatever it is, yes, you have to learn the techniques and all of that stuff. That's not where you make your magic, though. But software is a piece of it. See where is the next really important thing. Taking the time to really see what it is you want to say. That leads you to feeling what it is you want to say. I find that if you put it into words and tell yourself what it is, the message of this picture is, whether it's a portrait of somebody sitting there aging in front of your face, or whether it's this most magical landscape that you've walked into for the whatever, put it into words, and the words will tell you what you need to go back and use for lenses and everything else along the process. The bottom line is psychware. You got to get yourself in the right frame of mind to make this happen. If you are constantly trying to make photographs and make your great art in your photographs, and yet your left brain is saying, well, wait a minute, I got to make some money at this, so I can't spend so much time. Wait a minute, I got to go have lunch. Wait a minute. That's never going to allow your right brain, that's your creative, artsy brain, to come out and do what you need to do. You got to give yourself time and be in the right frame of mind to make all this happen. If you pull all this together, you're going to start making art that is you never would have expected. You've looked at enough stuff. You've inhaled enough stuff. So I ended up with a style that I call Manzuesco, which is a loose Latin for derivative for a certain softness. And it comes from growing up all those years. My mother had a painting in the hallway I would walk by all the time, a Corot painting. And Corot paintings were always soft muted colors and small subjects with lots of negative space, like you and me against the world kind of thing. When I started making photographs, without even realizing it, I was making Corots, and I am to this day. That's what, so can you bring up that gathering picture, Tony, somewhere?
Yep, it's up.
It's up, okay. So if you guys are looking at this gathering picture, that's exactly a week old. I may be grandpaing, but I haven't rolled over. There's, I don't know, elements of maybe 15, 20 images in there. Nowadays, the initial photograph for me is only a sketch. This is a starting point. And I take multiple sketches and I come back and I'm painting with pixels now, but that's all painted from scratch. The guy wasn't there and the trees weren't there and the birds weren't there and stuff. So that's pretty typical of my Manzuesco style. And you can see, if you know anything about a Corot painting, that's kind of a Corot painting. So how about if you bring up the splash over one, that other light?
Yep, you got
that one. All right.
Exactly.
So that's about as far away from the other one as possible. And that's my newest stuff. And nobody on the planet that knows me, or knows my work, would say that's possible that I could have done that. I don't think it's possible I could have done that. You have to keep pushing yourself. It doesn't mean I'll ever do more of it or stay there or anything else. But that's the only way you grow. You have to keep pushing and trying and seeing what you can do. It's your turn to talk now, Tracy.
Put me back in the hot seat. I'm sorry, Kenneth, you sounded like you had a question.
I was going to say to him that we're just so engaged by the conversation. You know, it's not every day where we're actually intrigued just to sit there and listen, because as artists, I think a lot of what you're saying is lost today. And even though Tracy and Tony always make fun of me for this, is because I'm the youngest, I'm the baby of the group, as I'm referencing this. But my approach comes in a mentality that's very similar to yours. Is I think because of my start to photography, I didn't have anyone that was there to kind of help guide me into it. I basically had to rely on, you know, going and seeing what is it that intrigued me, what did I like. And there were a couple of photographers that I saw, and I liked elements of their work. And so I fused them together to really create my style, and then just continue to read. And so kind of like how you're saying you might come back to something and you're continuously building on that. I
Yep.
think that's a lot of what people don't do today. And it's like,
Uh-huh.
okay, this photo, or I'm going to draw this image. Oh, we're off to the next thing. It's never a continuing process. And that's something that I love to do. I'm very big on remastering my photos, because someone actually had asked me, what do you do with your pictures? Do you delete them once you uploaded them or shared them? I said, I have my every photo I've taken in my entire 13-year professional career. I've never deleted a picture. And the reason for that is because I sometimes like to go back, because I'll think in my mind and recall something. Oh, I just developed something new that would work with this older photo, maybe 7 years ago. But let me see what I can actually bring out of this image now that I couldn't do 7 years
Yep.
ago.
Absolutely. If it intrigued you in the first place, it's worthy. And maybe its worthiness is finally coming to the surface.
One of the things that you've done for me, Arthur, is you've really made me slow down and look at the work of other people, and introduced me to artists that I maybe had at a glance looked at in the past, but you've really made me in depth think about what they've been doing. For example, Hopper. And I know you compare a lot of your work to Corot, but I compare some of your work to Hopper, because I see that environmental portrait in your work. But you have this wonderful ability to direct us not just to look at the eyes of the person, but sometimes the subject is, you've taught me how to have my subjects convey emotion while not looking at the camera, how to be part of a scene that sets the emotion, which I think we see a lot in Harper's work. And we also see in Newman's work, which is another photographer that I barely, well, Hopper was a painter, but I barely knew anything about Newman until I started working with you.
I
So
don't think
that,
even Newman knew a lot about Newman. and I got to spend time with Arnold Newman. I used to teach with him, and we'd have lunch. And I don't even think Arnold Newman knew a lot about Arnold Newman. But yeah, it's amazing. So we to circle back, we had asked where we get inspirations and stuff. You just look, and the right inspiration will hit you, and it will. The old adage, great artists copy, a good artist copy, great artists steal. It isn't that you're trying to look for an inspiration to copy it. Although many great artists, I mean, Renoir spent most of his early years in the Louvre copying great paintings, and he learned from that experience technical things and stuff. It isn't that you're trying to copy as much as you're trying to get inspired from something. For instance, you mentioned Hopper. And lately I've been doing a lot of Hopper-esque pictures, but also Andrew Wyeth pictures. It's very similar to Hopper. There's that layer of ambiguity that you don't know exactly what the storyline is. Years ago, and of course as a portrait photographer, I always basically made portraits that I tried to make people look good, but they looked like them. So when you looked like a picture, you looked at the picture, you could tell what somebody looked like, right? I always made pictures that told people what to think. So I was in this Newport Art Museum years ago with my wife, and we're looking around, and there's all these seascapes, and it's just water and boats, and that's it. And I look and look and look and look and look, and I said, she's still at the first painting. And I said, wait a minute, it's time for lunch. What are you looking at? And she said, wait a minute, stop it. Don't rush me. I said, they're all the same. They all look the same. It's just boats and water. She said, I like a picture that doesn't tell me what to think. that changed everything. I mean, all these years I've been telling people what to think when they looked at the pictures. But maybe I needed to make work like Hopper, like Andrew Wyeth, that allowed the viewer to engage their own emotions, their own memories, their own feelings with that work. So there's been things like Impressionism with Monet and all those guys. There's always been isms in the art world. I'm basically buying in nowadays to pith realism. There's hyperrealism, there's a lot of realism in this day and age, and photography certainly is the peak of realism. But pith realism is different. Don't go Googling it. I invented it, so it's not in Google.
I'm not Googling it. I'm looking at the note you sent me.
Right. So anyway, basically, it's bringing the real detailed world that you're looking at and marrying it with the feeling of that visual moment, of the spirit of that moment. An empty street full of cars that you know the people are inside those homes because they're quarantining. And you can feel that moment from an empty street that you know is normally filled with people. That's pith realism. That's bringing a storyline to your work. That's elevating the intensity of it other than just a mere map of the face of that moment. So, but all of this is only going to happen if you give yourself time to enjoy and embrace what other people are doing. Go ahead.
and it does. I mean, since I've met you and worked with you, I have a stack of books behind me, and what those books have done for me is they have expanded my school of thought. And when you say don't steal from them, don't copy from them, but you get nuggets from each one. And part of the nugget that I've been able to get from the last few years is to slow down and to expand, to not just be so focused on what I went in to do, but to actually kind of expand into the room or the emotion or the environment, and see beyond what I initially saw. That really has taken me a little bit to kind of understand that. But when I look at back to Newman, when I'm looking at Newman's books, and I've got Masterclass from him behind me. When I look at that, I can see just see it from different perspectives that I may not have intuitively saw, and it's teaching me to kind of reach into different directions and not just stay in one place, because my place for so long has been headshots and eyes. And now, maybe eyes are not even part of the piece. And that was the one I sent you in the last week, because you can't really see her eyes. It's all about the emotion of a moment, and there's no eyes in it.
It doesn't mean that it's still not a great portrait of her, though. We've always used the definition of pictures of somebody, but a portrait's about somebody. You don't have to see their face to know who it is, because you can feel who it is sometimes. That's, again, what Wyeth and Hoppet was doing all the time. And it comes from time. And in that time, you are honoring the subject you're photographing, whether it's a portrait or whether it's a landscape. If, again, when you start to look for inspiration, and whether you're Googling it or going to a museum, whatever, you need to take the time with it to try to get in the mindset of whoever that artist was that did it. I don't care whether it's a photojournalist, I don't care who it is. If you can try to get into their mindset, I'm betting that what you're going to feel is they spent time honoring the subject that they were portraying. And that's the key, I think. Putting the onus on the subject, honoring that subject is going to make all the difference in the world. You will make much higher art. You will be happy with the art. You will everything. It's a win-win-win scenario.
Yeah, absolutely. And
Kenneth, I knew you were there, Kenneth.
yeah, I'm still here. One thing you mentioned about time made me think about a photo that I took And you all remember it well, one that I took of a couple in Grand Central. And it was a couple that I actually tried to flag them down because I took some great photos of them, and I was there with a friend. And someone had asked me the question, how long do you take to capture some of the images that you do on the street? And I said, it just depends on that day. It depends on what I see, what catches my attention. I don't go out with a thought process as far as, okay, this is only what I want, and nothing else. Or it's basically, we're going to see what is it that we come away with. And so I went to Grand Central, and I actually looked at the EXIF data to see how long was I there. I know I was there for a long time. I was there for 5 hours. And only one picture, when I saw it, I didn't even take the picture yet. That's it. That is the picture. When I took that photo, before I ever edited the photo, before I ever brought it into Lightroom or anything, I said, that's the photo. I might have been here for 5 hours, but I know that's the photo. And when people saw it, everyone else, they enjoyed that picture. But I'm like, even if people didn't, that was the moment that I liked, that spoke to me the most. But to get that photo, I was already in Grand Central for 4.5 hours.
That's Cartier-Bresson. So if you want to, when you start to look for inspiration, it isn't just looking at the image, the piece of art or the photograph or whatever. You need to look behind the photograph at how that particular artist or photographer or whatever, how they lived, how they thought, how they worked. I mean, Cartier-Bresson would just prowl the streets and stuff, and he knew there was an image. He used to say, I didn't take this image, it gave itself up to me. He prowled the streets, and he knew that it was going to be there. He did the work he had to by being there. He brought all his senses to bear, and he was just waiting to celebrate that moment. It's all about bringing yourself down to that instant, that one moment, whether you're making a portrait, and it's that expression is who that person is. Or this moment, it's Ansel Adams making one picture of moonlight over whatever the hell that Hernandez picture thing. It's knowing that moment is what you were there to make and celebrate. And it's very exciting when you think about it that way. Now you're really bringing everything to bear. You were put there to make that picture in that moment.
Oh, go ahead, Tracy.
No, I was just gonna, while we were talking about Cartier, you gave me a book about him. Just, I wanted to mention it for anybody who might be interested in reading that. And I just couldn't think of the title.
I don't know, I'm sitting in my library here with hundreds and hundreds of books.
Yeah, I was trying to look at my shelf too.
Maybe 20 of them are Cartier-Bresson books, so I don't know which one it was now.
Oh, shoot. I'll think of it. I'll put it up at some point.
I say go to Google and look at stuff. Every single night I go to Google and I look at somebody new. I'm looking at Zoe Frank today.
Zoe Frank? I need to write that down.
Zoeyfrank, Zoe Frank. And I'm about to deep dive into Zoe Frank. She's a painter, young painter. Amazing. Just go look at Zoe Frank. So anyway, I do that all the time. And you need to do a deep dive into their lives, because that's where you're really going to get the nugget of what it is. Just like I mentioned in the beginning, Renoir saying, damn it, I was just getting it on my deathbed. They all have their moments. Picasso was probably, I don't like any of Picasso's work from any of his periods at all. Nothing. There's nothing about, I can respect it, but I don't like any of it. It doesn't matter. His quotes, his thought process. Go Google, when you get home tonight, Google Picasso quotes. You are going to learn more about the process of being an artist from those quotes than you will have learned from anything forever. So it's very exciting, but you just got to be in the moment and just drink it in. And what goes in will come out when it's supposed to.
Of things that you've observed that you might as far as from when you were starting out, in the middle of your career to now, what do you see in your mind might be something that people are missing today? That it could be from a technical standpoint, it could be from an inspiration standpoint. What is it that you feel that you see a lot of artists today where they're not really kind of diving or seeking into to really get that dynamic work and really feeling that work?
I think for me, what it was is I needed to get myself back on track. I found myself falling off track a lot. I would embrace too much of new technology and make what I now consider just pretties or tacky art or whatever. I found that over the years that making work for a living, I had to start getting really efficient about a portrait session. I couldn't just putz around and stuff. I had to get really good at it. If you're a wedding photographer, you have to get really good at the efficiency part of that stuff. Part of the problem with that is it sucks the life out of you. It sucks the life out of the work you make. So I had to keep dropping back to get back to where I should be. The last portrait series that I did the last few years, now that I'm retired and I have time on my hands, I maximize the time. And so I started doing portraits of veterans at the homeless veterans homes, and doing it just by window light. And it was an amazing experience for me to always tell all of you guys how important it is for you to connect with that person you're about to photograph. I don't know if I ever connected with people like I did in these last few years doing veterans portraits. And they would just sit there by the window, and I would just sit over here. The camera was on a tripod behind me, and a remote in my pocket. No lights, no nothing to interfere with anything. And it was amazing because they would allow, either you got one of two kinds. Either they were afraid to talk about their past as a veteran, or they couldn't wait to tell somebody about it. But either way, it was an amazing experience to just sit with somebody, not have any schedule, not have anything other than know that at some point they would say something that you would push the button and get an expression that just epitomized their life. Probably the one that stayed with me the longest was this little Army nurse, and she was 92 years old, blind and deaf. And she's sitting there in front of me. She couldn't hear me. She couldn't see me. And I didn't know how to connect with her to encourage her to give me the expression that I said I would feel it would signify her life. And I ended up after a couple of minutes just putting my hand on her knee. We just sat there. This little smile came across her face. That made all the difference. Yeah, I took one picture. That's the power of time. That's the power of you believing that you were put on this planet to do this stuff. Hey, we should go back to being normal here.
We were talking earlier, just to kind of expand on this, on the power of breathing together. Do you want to talk about that for a moment?
Yeah, Tracy said, what is this thing about breathing?
I know, everybody keeps asking me this. Oh, you've worked with Arthur. He's done the breath thing for you, right? I'm like, yeah, sure, right.
So in the pre-COVID days, when you could actually hug people, I was a real hugger.
You give great hugs.
Once you get old enough, people aren't, figuring you're going to be a lech or something, so you can get away with it. But The great thing about a hug is you can give good hugs, but everybody used to say I'd give good hugs. The reason is when you're holding on to somebody in that hug, the quicker that you can get yourself on the same breath experience. So if they inhale and you inhale at the same time, now you have a real connection with that person. There's a physical connection that you don't have just grabbing hold and letting go. And that's just an example of the fact that whether it's the portraits I was just talking about, or whether you photograph landscapes, I don't care what it is that you use as a subject for your art. You just need to find a way for you to connect in the now. Let all the technical go, all the superfluousness go of the moment and stuff. Get right into that moment and feel that moment. You got X amount of hours, minutes, seconds in this world. God put you here. He said, I'm going to give you X amount of years. Do something with it. But in that time, each one of those moments, those seconds, could be meaningful. And if you can really focus in on that, you will start making better pictures, better everything. You'll make your life better, everything can be better. Be in the now. I don't know. I mean, it's a broken record, but it's probably the most important tool of all of them that you can ever come up with.
And it goes with that. You have always taught me to press the damn button.
Well, that's the other thing. Sometimes we get so caught up in the moment that, again, reading histories of great photographers and stuff, they'll all tell you about this. I got so caught up in the moment, I didn't push the damn button. But focusing in the moment will help that. I remember in 1965, I spent the day photographing Martin Luther King in a march. And of all the candids and stuff that I got that day and stuff, the picture that stayed with me the longest is a moment when he was being introduced and about to speak to this massive crowd. And he's just sitting there, and he's just, I mean, there may have been 500,000 people around him, and yet he was totally alone. And you could tell that just looking at his face in that moment. And I pushed that button, and it's the most boring picture, and it's the most meaningful picture of the bunch. Because it just took him out of context, but put him in the real context of what he was. His thinking, feeling, why he was on this planet. So it's really being in the now.
I remember a moment with you maybe about 3 years ago where you were at the beach and you saw, was it an older couple with one of them in a wheelchair? And I remember you telling me that did you end up taking that on your cell phone? You just wished you had a camera with you. So that's another lesson that Arthur has tried to, I'm the person that never took my camera anywhere because for me, photography was my job and not my personal life. And Arthur has brought it to an extremely personal level. And now Tony is used to me running off the road to grab a picture in places that I probably shouldn't be, where I'm probably putting myself in my very low riding car in danger.
Yep.
But I learned that from Arthur about just having that camera with me so that I could be in the moment and being able to press the damn button when I needed to press the damn button. And I appreciate that. And I do have, we're closing in on the last 10 minutes and I do have a way I want to direct you. But before I do, we've got a question from Brandon Cunningham. He is saying that if there are 3 artists you would recommend an experienced photographer check out, who would those 3 be?
That's a tough one because it depends on you. It depends on what you need for a connection with somebody. You know, I can say that we mentioned Kosh. I spent time with Kosh, and I learned technique from Kosh. I learned incredible posing, incredible lighting. I learned the time thing from Kosh. I learned to honor my subject from Karsh. I learned those things from Karsh. I learned from Helmut Newton on the other end of the extreme to lighten up and to have fun. And so it depends what you're looking for, who I think you should look at. Arnold Newman, probably I would recommend to everybody because he was consummate craftsman in his techniques and everything. He had a process and a system that worked for him, but he really knew how to tell a story and stuff. And I think he's still underrated. I think in the future he'll be venerated to a much higher place, like Cartier-Bresson is and stuff. It's hard to say who it should be. My first inkling is to say it should be somebody outside the realm that you're looking at. So instead of it being a photographer, why don't you go and look for artists? But don't do it from a perspective of looking for what you already know. Look for something you don't already know. Or look for opposite of what you know. Like I like to do soft, muted color pictures. But I learned my growth process was from spending black and white time with Helmut Newton and stuff. So go somewhere else for something new, and then you will adapt it if it's right for you, what you can pull together.
I know I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, I think that all comes together. A lot of the things you were saying, especially for me, is just letting your emotion draw you towards something. And there's a couple of artists that I've come across recently that I really their photography has struck me in such a way that I need to dive further. One of them is this gentleman Gregory Cunningham, who does these large, choreographed scenes. And it's just fantastic. And I need to know, that's exactly it. I need to know more about him.
Well, and most of his stuff came off of Edward Hopper.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, it's very similar to the styles are very similar, environmental, but drawn back with some emotion to the scene. I think he just, the show he was part of at the Met just ended on Monday.
Yeah.
So I've been wanting to chat with Eileen to see if she has comments on his piece. And I think all of the photographers that Arthur is close to and has worked with, I mean, I think we've all taken from Arthur to find our artistic muse. I know, I think Tim Meyer is watching because I know he shared the post, so I'm imagining he's watching, and Tim has really found another life in studying Rembrandt, and I look at David Edmondson, and David worked with Arthur, and he found another life looking at Degas and Renoir. For me, I looked Arthur. I didn't even realize until I started working with Arthur how attracted I was to black and white contemporary photographers. So that's starting with Avedon and Penn and working my way through Newman and Karsh. I think has taken me. Karsh has had a huge effect on me because of the dynamic range in his images. So I think we all tend to go through that first exercise that Arthur told us about at the start of this program of randomly looking through magazines and finding what appeals to us, and then starting to explore that genre gets us pointed in some directions toward artists that we may not have been aware of in the past. Arthur, we are closing down on the end of our hour, but I wanted to leave with the lesson of when we are looking at a blank page and trying to come up with our, filling that blank page, what do we do? Where do we go?
I think that's always been the biggest dilemma for any artist of any kind. How do you make that first stroke? How do you make, when you turn on your camera, facing that blank canvas each and every time? It takes something deeper. You have to pull it up and say, okay, where's my starting point? And again, you can read the lives of artists throughout history, and that's where you're going to get your information of where do you start. But you will eventually get to the point where you just feel where you need to go. You do it with your compositions. When you look through that lens, you change lenses and stuff. Then you get into the rhythm of it, but you just feel it. It's you. The bottom line is, don't try to be somebody else. Don't try to do what a teacher's taught you. Don't try to do any of that stuff. Do what's in your spirit in that moment. And that's what's going to get you to where you want to go.
Awesome.
Eileen is watching, by the way. So Eileen, I'm going to hit you up on conversation on that show. But Eileen is also
me too.
making me think about the thought that our museums, so many of our museums have struggled through this situation with COVID.
Yep.
Many of our museums are open. And so if you can physically get to a museum, please go out and have these experiences in person.
Yes.
And support our museums so that we have these in the
nothing
future.
like the senses. So you were never going to get anything from Google that you will get standing, facing in front of that art in a museum.
I absolutely
Same thing with
agree.
a book. You can read it on your iPad, but a physical book in your hands, for some reason, there's another whole level. When you write, you can type it on your damn screen, but if you're physically right, you are getting it on a whole different level. When we talk like this, you can get an idea in your head and it'll spin and spin and spin and spin. But the minute you talk to somebody else, even talk to yourself out loud, your brain processes it different. It comes out different. When you make art, you will make it different if you just use all of your senses. Again, coming back to taking the time to do that.
I think that you, going back to your comment about being in the now, be here, be now, and that's really strong. And I understand that we're all sequestered and the computer screen is the best way to get places. But I'll tell you, man, being in the now, the more you can stand in front of the actual work, the more you can place yourself in the situation, in the woods, and whatever draws your passion out. It's significant into growing you as a human and an artist. It's one thing to see the photo in a book or on the screen of George Washington crossing the Delaware, but go to the Met and stand in front of that massive painting, and you have such a stronger emotive response to it and a deeper appreciation of just what the artist put into that. I think there's a lot to be said of, when we can, is getting out and being there, and surrounding yourself with the things that bring you joy, and elevate you to be a better artist.
Arthur, thank you.
Yes, we appreciate you.
We've had a nice night. Usually I have my jammies on by now. So
Well, we won't keep you too long from that. But
or your scotch. We won't keep you from the scotch.
whatever, yeah.
So
And
you
make
do owe
sure
me a Zoom,
make
Arthur.
sure you buy my book. I know you can't see my new book. This is just a cover. That's all I got done so far, but it's okay. Actually, I got a lot written too.
awesome, thank you. Well, and
Thank
thanks,
you guys.
and thanks everybody. And Arthur, yes, thank you so much. I wish like you said, we could go on for another 10 hours. But
I'll save you a hug, Mark. Tony and Kenneth.
Please
and
do,
Tracy
please
and,
do, yeah.
And everybody that's out there.
When we can
Someday we'll get to do that again.
absolutely.
Gina and I are holding you to our Zoom time. our
Yes,
appointment.
okay. I'm
I
ready.
know. I'm the one that put that limit on it, so I'll let.
No, no.
We're good.
No, we're good.
Got it. So thank
Thanks,
you,
guys.
everybody, and thank you, Arthur. I appreciate you being here with us. Kenneth and Tracy, as always, some fantastic conversation and great inquisitive questions. I really enjoy. Wow, this is the part of the conversation that I always enjoy the most is how to bring more of ourselves out into the work that we're creating. And Arthur, you're just a fount of knowledge in that respect. And I thank you for being here. And hopefully we can do this again sometime.
Okay, I'm with you.
Awesome.
I'm holding you to it.
And thank you, everybody, for being with us today. What a fantastic conversation. I'm glad you were here. And we'll do this again, at least one more time before the end of the year. And then hopefully we'll do it much more in the coming year. Thank you again. And